Welcome to the Psychology Department's video tutorial providing you with some examples of classical conditioning in action. This video is meant to provide you with examples to practice labeling the US, UR, CS, and CR, and to expose you to the applications of classical conditioning in our lives. Let's start with a reminder of the definition of classical conditioning. Classical conditioning occurs when a previously neutral stimulus comes to elicit a response through its associations with the stimulus that naturally brings about that response. Let's take a quick moment to review the relationship between the US, UR, CS, and CR. Before conditioning, the unconditioned stimulus elicits the unconditioned response, but the neutral stimulus does not elicit that response. During conditioning, the neutral stimulus is paired with the unconditioned stimulus, which creates an association between the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus. After conditioning, the neutral stimulus is no longer neutral. It now serves as a conditioned stimulus that elicits a conditioned response. Sometimes, just the sight of a cat can make someone who is allergic to cat dander have a sneezing fit and watery eyes. Pause the video and see if you can label the elements of this classically conditioned allergic reaction. What is the unconditioned stimulus? What is the unconditioned response? Remember, this is a natural cause-effect stimulus-response pair. What is the conditioned stimulus? Keep in mind that this is the one that was previously neutral. And finally, what is the conditioned response? Before conditioning, exposure to cat dander elicits the allergic reaction, but just the sight of a cat does not elicit that response. During conditioning, the sight of the cat is paired with the cat dander, which creates an association between the sight of the cat and the cat dander. After conditioning, the sight of the cat is no longer neutral. It now serves as a conditioned stimulus that elicits an allergic response. Note that the conditioned allergic reaction is typically minor when compared to the actual allergic reaction to the cat dander. Before moving on, I want to present you with some common errors. These are actual examples from previous students who were asked to identify the US, UR, CS, and CR for the conditioned allergic reaction as part of an in-class exercise. One student identified the US as watery eyes and sneezing, and the UR as the sight of the cat. This would mean that the watery eyes caused the sight of the cat. Remember, the stimulus is the cause and the response is the effect. That same student identified the CS as the cat and the CR as the sneezing. This is technically correct, but it is unclear that the student understands that the CS is the sight of the cat, because they only wrote, quote, the cat, unquote. This leaves me wondering, what about the cat is the conditioned stimulus? Also, by looking at the whole thing, we see that the student did not identify the UR and CR as the same type of response. They should have written something related to an allergic response, like sneezing, in both places. Here's another example of incorrect labels for the cat allergy example. In this one, the student identified the US as the sight of the cat and the UR as the allergic response. By labeling this unconditioned, this would mean that it is natural to have an allergic reaction just at the sight of the cat. An allergic reaction is the body's response to an allergen inside the body. Just seeing a cat will not naturally cause an allergic response. This student then identified the CS as the cat dander and the CR as the sneezing. This would mean that one had to learn to sneeze in response to cat dander. You can see that what happened here was that the student mixed up the terms unconditioned and conditioned. Remember, conditioned is another way of saying learned, and unconditioned is another way of saying natural or innate. Let's try another one. Pete's wife frequently puts a mint in her mouth before initiating sex with him. Now Pete just has to smell mint and he gets sexually aroused. Pause the video and see if you can label the elements of this classically conditioned response. I think it often can be helpful to start with the conditioned response. Ask yourself, what did Pete learn after conditioning? Pete learned to associate sex with the smell of mint. Therefore, the learned stimulus was the smell of mint, and the learned response was sexual arousal to the smell of mint. Remember that the CR and the UR are the same. What makes them different is what causes them. So, you know that you can fill in the UR box with sexual arousal. To fill in the US box, ask yourself, what naturally causes Pete to become sexually aroused? This is Pete's wife's sexual advances. This might include taking her clothes off and kissing and touching him. There's no reason for the smell of mint to have a response before conditioning. Conditioning happens because his wife frequently puts a mint in her mouth before initiating sex with him. I like this example because it provides us with an opportunity to ponder the possible consequences of such a conditioned response. What might happen if Pete is sexually aroused by a coworker or store clerk who smells minty? Would Pete have the insight to be able to attribute the arousal to the conditioning, or would he attribute the arousal solely to the coworker or clerk? How much of our behavior is pushed and pulled by conditioning that happens outside of our awareness? Something to think about, right? Let's see how you do with a multiple choice question. The UR in the sexual arousal example is the smell of mint, sexual arousal to the smell of mint, sexual advances of Pete's wife, sexual arousal to the wife's sexual advances. Pause the video now to give yourself time to select the correct answer. The unconditioned response is the sexual arousal to the wife's sexual advances. Remember, unconditioned means natural or not learned. Pete did not need to learn to become sexually aroused in response to his wife's advances. If you did not select the correct answer, go back to the previous slide to review the diagram.
In an attempt to save lions like you can see daily here at Denver Zoo, curator of large mammals Holly Colohan flew to Botswana in the summer of 2013. The country deeply cares for its wildlife, as ecotourism is one of its top industries. Vast amount of protected area is given to animals such as lions. Unfortunately, those lions can periodically hop fences into neighboring cattle lands, threatening the country's major livestock industry and creating a significant human-wildlife conflict as farmers will try to kill them to protect their cattle. Denver Zoo partnered with the country's wildlife department in an attempt to relocate and track wandering lions, but also just began a project never before tried with the species: conditioned taste aversion. Conservationists take beef samples, treat them with a medication that makes the lions feel a bit queasy, and wrap the samples in cowhide before feeding them to capture lions. The goal is that the lions will then choose prey other than cattle by associating the smell with feeling sick.
If you've ever had food poisoning and had a real aversion to eating or drinking, you know, that same thing that made you sick again, it's the exact same principle.
Colohan says that little bit of distress is far better than the possible alternative. She says she hopes to return to Botswana in 2014 to continue helping with this ongoing project, one of many Denver Zoo programs around the world that helps save animals due to donor support.
Pause the video to fill in the US, UR, NS, CS, and CR. Remember that the NS and the CS are the same stimulus, before and after conditioning, respectively. The point of the project was to condition the lions to stay away from the cattle by producing a conditioned taste aversion. So the beef is the conditioned stimulus, and the nausea to the beef is the conditioned response. Before conditioning, the beef did not produce the nausea response, which made the beef neutral with respect to the unconditioned stimulus. However, the medication did naturally bring about nausea, which makes it the unconditioned stimulus. Take a moment to compare your answers with the correct diagram. I'd like to end with one more example. This one is pretty complicated and advanced for an introductory class, so please don't be too upset with yourself if you have trouble following it. I am including it to illustrate to you that this is complex stuff with grave consequences and important implications for understanding human behavior. I'll do my best to explain it to you as briefly and clearly as possible. Drug tolerance refers to the decrease in the effect that a drug has after repeated use of the drug. Two consequences of drug tolerance are that the person needs to use more of the drug to get the same desired effect, and generally speaking, they can use more of the drug without overdosing. Drug tolerance happens when the body makes changes to compensate for the regular presence of the drug. That is, if a person uses alcohol or heroin every day, the body makes some changes to prepare for the drug. There is evidence to support that drug tolerance is situation-specific and that this can be explained by classical conditioning. It goes something like this. Before conditioning, repeated drug use causes the body to make some biological changes to compensate for the presence of the drug. Also, before conditioning, the body would not make any biological changes to compensate for the drug environment itself. What I mean by the drug environment is simply the place where the person is using the drug. For example, in their friend's apartment bedroom. If the person typically and regularly uses the drug in their friend's apartment bedroom, then conditioning may occur. That is, the person is in their friend's bedroom, then they use the drug, which causes the body to make some biological adjustments. Over time, the friend's apartment bedroom all by itself may cause some biological compensation for the body to prepare for the anticipated drug. This means that if the person were to use the drug in a different environment, there would be less biological compensation or less tolerance for the drug. This could lead to an accidental overdose, taking more of the drug than the body can handle. This concludes our video tutorial on examples of classical conditioning. There are more video tutorials on this topic and how it relates to other types of learning. Thank you.